They said I was the one ruining my own child's happiness, but if you saw your son-in-law fake paralysis and cry for money from the kindness of others, what would you do? I didn't shout, I didn't hit anyone, I simply brought the truth into the light, and the moment that light hit the big screen in front of 250 people, every clap turned into a deadly silence. No one could believe it, but that wheelchair was nothing but a prop. If you've ever been betrayed, ever watched your kindness be used against you, stay until the end of this story, because sometimes the strongest strike of justice isn't an explosion, but the flick of a switch that makes the whole world see the truth. Before we begin, allow me to thank you, the one listening, the one who still believes kindness deserves protection. Please subscribe, share the story, and tell me where you're listening from, because who knows, maybe the small light you turn on today will guide someone standing in the darkness of betrayal. I still remember the scent of kiln-dried pine rising from the new wall panels. In the dining room that night, a clean, warm smell, the kind that has followed me through 35 years of wrenches, pliers, and nail guns. My house in Ashfield sits on a ridge facing Rivanna, where old oaks hide the rooftops of the bigger homes. I repaired every outlet myself, aligned every copper pipe, cut every vent for the HVAC, not to save money, but because I don't trust anyone who's never heard a house breathe to touch its heart. Tonight, the dining room was open wide, with a small chalk sign over the fireplace reading, "Congratulations, Pierce Home Services, West End." Friends, old crew members, loyal customers, and a few neighbors filled the place. Glasses clinked, dark blue checkered tablecloths lay smooth, and the stew pot bubbled softly. I stood behind the kitchen counter and wiped my hands on my apron with the company logo, a simple line house sketch over the slogan, "Repairing homes, restoring trust." People say I'm stern, quiet. Truth is, I learned one rule. Talk less and do it right, and the pipes run smooth. Talk too much and work sloppily, and the leak will come back to punish you when you least expect it. Isabel walked in from the hallway, arms full of sunflowers, her deep blue dress matching her eyes. My daughter works in marketing at Monticello Events. She knows how to make a simple backdrop look like a promise. She kissed my cheek. "Dad, I'll handle the speech tonight. You just sit and take the applause." I smiled, nodded, and fixed the pencil behind my ear. The habit of a tradesman never dies. Victor Grant stepped in behind her, wearing a perfectly fitted silver-gray suit, cedarwood cologne, subtle but intentional. Victor is a sales manager at a luxury car showroom in Richmond, the type whose words shine like fresh paint. He hugged my shoulder, smiling widely. "Dad Pierce, tonight belongs to our family." I returned the gesture, gripping his shoulders to test the muscle tension, another habit from home repair. Everything has a stability rating, even a son-in-law's gaze. Nancy Lyle, my neighbor and friend from before air compressors, even existed in my shop, stood near the table with a peach pie. She said she'd tell a few old stories about me, half teasing, half fond. Roland is the only man who fixed my furnace during a snowstorm without charging extra. He just said, "You don't let someone sleep with cold feet at night?" Everyone laughed. I waved it off as nothing. At 6:45, when the second roast tray was served, Victor tapped his glass. "Excuse me," he said, voice smooth like he was back at the showroom. "Tonight isn't only the opening of Pierce Home Services' new West End branch, but also a thank you from Isabel and me to the father who has kept so many Charlottesville homes warm and safe." People clapped. I felt shy. Then Victor pulled his chair back, face tightening, his hand trembling on the table's edge. "There's something I haven't said." He paused for effect. 2 weeks ago, while helping a client in Richmond, I had an accident, and he swallowed, eyes glossy. The doctor said I might never walk normally again. The room fell into a strange stillness. The stew pot cracked a bubble like a distant metronome. Isabel covered her mouth and leaned into him, her shoulders trembling. "That's why," Victor continued, We canceled our honeymoon, not because of money, because of my health. I've started a vlog about my recovery journey called Help Victor Walk Again. I didn't expect the community to. He reached for the iPad waiting beside him. The screen lit up. The cover photo showed him in a hospital gown with a brave smile, and behind him my company logo, Pierce Home Services, like supportive hands. My heart tightened. The video played. Soft piano. Text. He once walked through so many homes. Now he hopes to take one step again. Next. Victor in a wheelchair in a parking lot. Isabel pushing him. The blurred background showed the sign of our new West End branch. My company logo sharp as a correction stamp. Voiceover. Every safe home is a step worth taking. Help Victor stand again. Then a number flashed in the corner. $52,000. Raised so far. Guests gasped, then applauded. I stayed still. I heard a quiet clink. Nancy Lyle, closest to me, tilting her head, squinting as if trying to see through the glossy finish of the story. Applause thundered, chairs scraped, and a few people wiped their eyes. Victor knew the rhythm. He set the iPad down and stood leaning on the chair, gripping the table edge like he needed support. "Dad," he said, voice breaking, "I use the company logo not to borrow your name, but because to me, Pierce Home Services represents what I believe. Trust. I hope you don't mind." Looked up. The overhead light reflected off the kitchen glass, making everything brighter than natural. I looked into his eyes. Ash gray, beautiful, cold, and clean like freshly polished metal. I nodded because in that moment, words were out of place. People gathered to congratulate him. An art gallery owner on Water Street tearfully told Isabel how strong she was. One of my younger crew members nudged his friend. "The boss's son-in-law is a fighter." Nancy set the pie on a side table, still holding the napkin, her eyes fixed on the iPad like she was reading a blueprint, searching for a wrong connection. I tried to swallow a bite of meat, but my tongue had lost its sense of taste. Sometimes a tradesman's life warns him of a leak with nothing but a hair-thin hiss. Here the hiss was one small detail. That afternoon, around 2:30, I had been in the company garage checking a vacuum pump for the West End team. The roll-up door was partly open, a strip of sunlight across the concrete floor, and Victor walked in. Walked, not limped, not hopped. Walked, clean and steady like a showroom runner. I watched him squat to read a warranty sticker on a machine crate, then stand up with one foot pressing firmly, the other shifting smoothly. I had smiled politely then, assuming he'd drop by for a brochure for the grand opening. I'm not sure where that smile is now. "Dad!" Isabel came to my side, gripping my elbow. "Thank you for raising me to be grateful. I never imagined we'd need community help like this, but people have been so good to us." I stroked her hand, its skin thin as a varnish washed with tears. "Everything will be fine," I said, wanting to believe it the way I believe in a sealed weld. But in my trade, anything too tightly sealed in the wrong place traps moisture longer than needed. Victor raised his glass. "To Pierce Home Services West End, and thank you to the hearts helping me walk again." Glasses clinked, a single bright ring. I glanced at my company logo on the iPad, set beneath a smiling couple with the caption, "Love will lift us." I don't hate the phrase. I just know love can't be pumped into a cracked pipe. It needs proper pressure, proper materials, proper procedure, and truth. The party lasted another hour. People left in waves, some carrying pie, others slipping business cards into Victor's pocket, if you ever need anything. Isabel hugged everyone. I cleared plates, scrubbed dried sauce from linens, hearing cars start outside. The house thinned out. Only Nancy stayed to help fold chairs. She set a stack of white cloths on the table and looked up at me. "Beautiful, truly," she said softly. "Just hope life isn't a movie." I didn't answer. I dimmed the lights, leaving a single warm strip across the wood. As I carried the trash bag to the porch, Nancy froze. She'd heard me say, not to her, not to anyone but to the house itself, testing its owner. He walked into my garage on his own feet this afternoon. The next morning, I went into the workshop earlier than usual. The smell of metal, oil, and old wood mixing, familiar as a second breath in my life. I made coffee, turned on the wall-mounted surveillance screen, a habit only people who used to be maintenance engineers still keep. The company's camera system stores every entry and exit for the month, and I only meant to check it for peace of mind. But in the footage from the 17th of May at 14:17, the person who appeared was none other than Victor Grant. He drove a black sedan, stepped out lightly with his hands in his pockets, then walked straight into the garage. He bent down to sign a delivery form, chatted with the technician, crouched to inspect a shipment crate, and stood back up on two steady legs. No crutches, no back brace, no sign of pain. This timestamp was only 15 or 16 days before the party, exactly during the period Victor claimed he was undergoing spinal injury treatment and canceling the honeymoon for reconstructive surgery. According to him, he should have been in a wheelchair or a hospital bed, unable to walk. Yet in my workshop, he moved like a healthy man. My coffee had gone cold without me noticing. I enlarged the footage and saw him smiling, using one foot to nudge the garage door for balance. Not a single sign of someone who couldn't walk. I saved the video to a USB and stored it in the file drawer beside old contracts. For the first time in years, my workshop felt dead silent. Outside the window, the May sun blazed, but inside my chest, it felt like cold air was creeping in through the pipes. I told the story to Thomas Reddick, a longtime client and civil attorney I jokingly call the guy who reads the fine print before anyone even speaks. We met at a small cafe on the corner of Market Street. I showed him the USB. Thomas was silent for a few minutes, then said quietly, "If this footage is accurate, my friend, this is no longer a family matter. This is fraud, charity solicitation fraud." I sighed, but I don't want Isabel to get hurt. She lost her mother too young, and if she learns her husband staged all this... Thomas nodded, his eyes cold like someone who's read hundreds of forged documents. "I understand, but you must keep all evidence. If there are fake medical documents, that's a federal crime. With more than $50,000 involved, it's enough for the U.S. attorney to jump in." I stared at the wooden table, noticing tiny cracks running along the grain like the ones forming in my family. I once believed that if you sealed a joint well enough, the water wouldn't leak. But once trust fractures, no adhesive can hold it together. That afternoon, back at the office, I opened the company account system to check the expense Victor once asked me to guarantee, because the showroom required proof of stable income. The buy transaction line froze me in place. Grant Consulting LLC, a company that had never existed in any tax record, had just received more than $49,000 from the Help Victor Walk Again Foundation. The signer, Victor Grant. I reached for my phone to call Thomas, then stopped. I needed stronger evidence. I printed every statement, clipped them into a brown file folder, labeled Evidence Pack, GoFundMe Fraud, Pierce Home Services Misuse. Every letter I wrote in black ink, strokes hard as steel. That night, I couldn't sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw my company logo on that fundraising video, an emblem of trust turned into a tool for deception. Isabel probably believed her husband was in pain and fighting bravely, and I, her father, knew the truth was walking on 2 feet in broad daylight. 3 days later, when the Help Victor Walk Again fund passed the $50,000 mark, a new notification appeared in the company inbox. Order confirmation, Mercedes GLC 300 paid in full. Recipient, Victor Grant. I stared at the screen, my fingers shaking slightly. Not from anger, but because I finally understood. Everything in life has a moment when the pipe bursts. I just didn't know how far the water would spray this time. I arrived at the office while it was still dark. Last night's rain had soaked the brick walkway out front, and the puddles reflected the workshop's dim yellow lights like a row of eyes watching. I turned on the computer and opened the company statements. The same paperwork Victor had borrowed 2 weeks earlier to prove income when the showroom asked for a financial guarantee. Back then, I didn't think much of it. As a father-in-law, I signed without hesitation, a gesture of trust. Looking at it now, I realized I hadn't just lent him a document. I had lent him the dignity of an entire lifetime. The company's accounting system is linked directly to our business account at Rivanna Credit Union. I searched by the date he submitted the paperwork. The transaction list appeared as usual: material costs, employee insurance, client payments, and one unfamiliar name: Grant Consulting, LLC. I frowned. My company had never worked with anything by that name. The tax ID field was blank, and the transaction description read, professional service fee. The amount transferred was $49,200, the same figure Thomas had mentioned. Almost the entire amount rise through the Help Victor Walk Again Fund. I opened the details. The beneficiary was Victor Grant, and the contact address matched exactly the apartment he shared with Isabel in the Willow Creek complex. There was no doubt now Grant Consulting, LLC was nothing more than a shell used to pull money out of the fundraising account. I sat in silence for a long moment, hearing the rain hit the metal roof, each drop reminding me of every word Victor had said at the party, his trembling voice, the shaking eyes, and that line, "I just want to learn to walk like everyone else." Turns out the only walking he cared about was the kind that leads straight to money. Near noon, I drove to Thomas Reddick's office on the corner of Court Square. He was reviewing a case file and looked up when he saw me. I set the printed statements in front of him, page by page, without saying anything. Thomas flipped through them carefully, then looked up, his voice sinking. "I told you, Roland, this is textbook GoFundMe fraud. He created a fake company and transferred charity funds into his personal account. With nearly $50,000 involved, the IRS can treat this as wire fraud, a federal crime." I looked out the window as it began raining again. "I need to know if you know anyone in the IRS criminal investigation. I just want them to take a look. I don't want noise, but I can't let my company be dragged down by this deception." Thomas nodded and pulled a business card from his drawer. "I'll send it to someone I trust over there. But first, you need a complete file. Don't send anything until the evidence is airtight." I returned to the office and turned on the printer. The steady rhythm of the machine sounded like my own heartbeat. Each sheet bore a piece of evidence. I stacked them layer by layer into a brown folder, black ink label handwritten, "Evidence Pack, GoFundMe Fraud, Pierce Home Services Misuse." When I sealed it, my fingertips were stained with ink, and the mix of ink and cold metal in the room jolted me fully awake. In the afternoon, the sky cleared. I had just switched off the workshop lights when my phone rang. On the other end was Isabel, her voice trembling so softly I had to press the phone tight to my ear. "Dad, I'm sorry to bother you. The hospital sent the first bill for Victor's surgery. I don't know how to say this. They're asking for a $50,000 deposit to schedule it. Can I borrow it, just temporarily? Once the fund updates, we'll pay you back." I stayed silent, listening to her rapid breathing, picturing my daughter's eyes, the eyes of someone who still believed a beautiful lie. "All right, I understand," I said, my voice strangely calm. "Send me a copy of the invoice. I'll take a look." I hung up, set my phone down, then opened my recording app. I had recorded the entire call, not to hurt my child, but to preserve evidence for the day the truth must be switched on. On my desk, the file stack grew thicker with each page. Every printout, every number, every call felt like a weld I had to make by hand. Careful, cold, and painful. I looked up at the photo of my late wife on the wall. She was still smiling, her eyes soft like the workshop lights at night. I whispered to the picture, "You know, we taught our daughter to live honestly. Now the truth itself will be the final hammer in my hand." The light reflected off. The black ink on the folder's cover and I knew the silent war had begun. The sky in Charlottesville that day was clear and dry, early summer sunlight filtering through young oak leaves, casting my truck's shadow onto the road like a strip of steel. On the passenger seat, the evidence pack folder lay still, its corner curled from being flipped through all night. I arrived at the orthopedic clinic of Dr. Harold Klein, the man Victor mentioned in his video. The brass sign gleamed. Klein Orthopedic and Spine Clinic, since 1988. I took a long breath before stepping in. The reception area was quiet, the smell of antiseptic mixed with printer paper and plastic chairs. A nurse asked if I had an appointment. I handed her my card, saying I was Roland Pierce, owner of a maintenance service company, needing to verify details about patient Victor Grant. She frowned but went inside. Minutes later, Dr. Klein appeared, a man in his 50s, gray-streaked hair, tall frame, deep and courteous voice. I explained briefly that Victor had used his name in a fundraising video, quoting him as saying, "Dr. Klein advised immediate surgery to preserve walking ability." Klein looked at me slowly, then opened his computer. "I remember this patient. He came once for x-rays and an MRI, but the results showed only mild disc curvature, no nerve damage. I never recommended surgery. I recommended physical therapy and weight loss." I placed the diagnosis paper Victor had sent Isabel on the desk. Under the bolded words, "Lumbar spine injury, surgery recommended, Dr. Harold Klein." The doctor glanced at it and let out a brief, surprised laugh. "This isn't my form. The logo in the corner is old. We changed it in 2018. The dateline uses a different font, and this signature is not mine." He took a pen and signed at the bottom of the copy with the note, "This document was not issued or signed by me, Harold Klein, M.D." Then he looked at me, eyes both stern and sympathetic. "I've seen people forge medical records for profit, but I never imagined someone would be bold enough to do it when everything is traceable. Are you planning to report this?" I nodded, thanked him, and placed the signed confirmation into my folder. That afternoon, I met Thomas Reddick at his Court Square office. He reviewed the confirmation and said, "Excellent. I'll draft an affidavit of falsified medical record, a formal sworn statement with Dr. Klein's signature, filed alongside the GoFundMe documentation. When we send this to the IRS, they'll know this is medical record-based fraud." Thomas spoke with the calm of someone familiar with heavy cases, while I sat across from him, gripping the folder as if afraid it would vanish. Every piece of evidence I gathered felt like a hammer strike, decisive but cold. That evening I returned to the workshop, yellow light spilling across old concrete walls. I turned on the computer, plugged in my silver USB, the one I usually used for project schematics, and copied everything. The security camera footage, the photo of Dr. Klein's confirmation, the bank statements, Isabel's recorded call. As the progress bar filled, I named the folder Pierce Case, Fraud Evidence. I knew that from now on, every file inside it was no longer data. It was a witness to the truth. When I left the office, the late-day sunlight stretched across the sidewalk. I didn't go home, but stopped by a cafe near downtown Albemarle. Just as I was about to order an espresso, my phone buzzed. It was Nancy Lyle, my longtime neighbor, her voice urgent and slightly stunned. "Where are you, Roland? I think you'll want to see this." Seconds later, she sent a video. On screen was Victor Grant, not in a wheelchair, not on crutches, not wearing a brace. He was in a white dress shirt, smiling widely, standing in the middle of the dance floor at Albemarle Lounge, holding a glass of wine, spinning with a group of friends. Colored lights flashed across his face, wine sloshing with every movement, the music pounding like it was striking the truth itself. Nancy added, "I'm here for a friend's birthday and saw him. Recorded quickly. Hope this helps." I watched the 15-second clip 3 times. No law degree, no expert needed. Just eyes to see. He never had to learn to walk. He was only acting. I saved the video to the silver USB, naming it Proof Nightclub Video Albemarle. That night, I sat in the workshop, yellow light gleaming off the USB like a bright blade. I placed my hand on it and whispered, "The truth has started speaking, Nancy, and this time it's keeping pace with the liar." I arrived at Isabel's house on a gloomy Friday afternoon, just after a summer storm had passed, and left streaks of water on the road, like smeared ink on an unfinished letter. The two-story home in Willow Creek was quiet, the front door slightly ajar, the curtains still open, and as I stepped onto the porch and knocked 3 times with no reply, I was about to leave when I heard the sound of wheelchair wheels on wooden flooring, before Victor appeared in the doorway, sitting in a black wheelchair, a thin blanket over his knees, his expression tired, but just a little too polished. The exact same look he wore in all those inspirational recovery videos he kept posting. "You came without telling us?" he asked, his voice carrying that familiar rehearsed confidence. And I looked inside to see the living room lights on, a live stream camera on the bookshelf with its tiny red indicator blinking, and behind it a backdrop printed with Walk for Hope Foundation. Isabel was clearing the table, her face pale, her eyes swollen, and when she turned around she looked startled. "Dad, I didn't know you were coming," she said, and I nodded, stepped in and placed on the table the silver USB in my pocket, the one holding all the evidence. The Albemarle Lounge dance floor video, Dr. Klein's written confirmation, the bank statements, and the recorded call asking for money. I set it directly in front of Victor and said, "I'm just here to return something to you." And Victor braced a hand on the wheelchair, turning toward me, trying hard to look calm as he said, "I don't understand what you're talking about." But I glanced at the camera that was still recording and spoke slowly, clearly. "You're live streaming, and I'm holding the evidence." And the air in the room thickened as Isabel dropped the dish towel, her hands trembling, whispering, "Dad, what are you talking about?" But I didn't answer her yet. I just looked at Victor. He swallowed, eyes darting between me and the USB, his finger twitching the way people do when fear hits the right nerve. "What evidence?" He tried to laugh. "You're accusing me now? You know the law. I have a right to privacy. You can't use company cameras on me like that. I'll sue you for invasion of privacy." His voice rising and cracking, but to me it only sounded pitiful. "You can sue," I said, my tone steady, not loud, not soft. "But remember, when you turn on a camera, you make your own lies public." And Isabel burst into tears, sobs shaking her shoulders. "Dad, please, don't make this worse. I can't handle it." And I stepped closer, placed a hand on her shoulder, saying, "Sweetheart, I'm not trying to make anything big. I just want the truth to have a place in this house." Then I turned to Victor with no anger left in me, only the cold clarity of a tradesman who has seen a pipe rotting from the inside out, and said, "You don't know what the public is yet, Victor, but you will meet them soon." And I picked up the silver USB, slipped it back into my vest pocket, and walked toward the door as the blinking red light on the camera kept recording. But this time, it was capturing the only real moment in his entire performance. When the door clicked shut behind me, I heard Isabel crying and Victor barking her name. And as I stepped down the porch, the wind moved through the willow trees, carrying the smell of damp soil and leftover rain. Back home, I called Thomas, who answered immediately. And after I told him what had happened, he said in a low voice, "You did the right thing. Now we wait. People like Victor always drag themselves into the light eventually." I looked toward the workshop safe where I kept the silver USB and the backup files, knowing that when the time came, the light wouldn't need me to turn it on. They would flip the switch themselves. I gazed out at the backyard where the workshop lamp reflected off my copper pipe tools, thinking how some things don't need a hand to break. Pressure alone makes them leak, and sooner or later, they blow apart. 2 months had passed since the confrontation in Willow Creek and Ashfield had taken on the colors of late autumn. Oak leaves fell onto dew-wet walkways, and the roads around Ravenna were so quiet I could hear the wind brushing past the rows of copper pipes in my workshop. Inside the safe, the silver USB lay beside the thick folder labeled Pierce Case, Fraud Evidence, and every morning I opened the safe and touched the cold metal as if touching a promise that justice would come. It just wasn't time yet. In early October, an envelope arrived embossed with the Walk for Hope Foundation logo. Inside was a silver-lettered invitation. We respectfully invite Mr. Roland Pierce, the man who inspired Victor Grant's journey of resilience. The shimmering words made me laugh. The man who had exploited my image was now inviting me on stage as a symbol of trust. The gala would be held at Ting Pavilion, Downtown Pavilion, on October 12th, large-scale, live-streamed across social media. I brought the invitation to the office of my friend and attorney, Thomas Reddick. He glanced at it and raised an eyebrow. He really invited you, as the inspiring father-in-law? Bold move. But Roland, this is the perfect opportunity. I looked at him and asked slowly, Opportunity for what, Thomas? He tilted his head with a half-smile. A chance for the truth to take the stage. Bring Nancy Lyle's video, the one of him drinking and dancing at Albemarle Lounge, Dr. Klein's written confirmation, the Grant Consulting LLC statements, and Isabel's recorded call asking for $50,000. You just press play. When the lights come on, they'll see exactly who he really is. I nodded. If they build a stage to celebrate falsehood, I'll bring the light that shows the truth. That night, I opened the silver USB and merged every file into a single presentation. It began with the words, Every healing journey begins with the truth, followed by Nancy Lyle's bar floor footage, then Dr. Klein's statement, then the Grant Consulting LLC bank records, and finally the recording of Isabel asking for $50,000 for hospital fees. Each file was a hammer strike, forming the steady rhythm of justice. The next day, Nancy Lyle came by the workshop with a basket of apples, setting it on the table. I hear he's planning quite a big gala. The whole area's talking. Are you going? She asked. I answered calmly, yes. He invited me as an inspiration. I'll go show them what real inspiration is, living honestly, not deceitfully. 3 days later, Isabel called. Her voice shook. Dad, please, I'm begging you, don't go that night. He'll be humiliated. He'll lose everything. I can't handle seeing him shamed. I stayed silent for a moment before speaking clearly, each word steady. That is the only thing that needs to happen, Isabel. After hanging up, I looked at the old sign in the workshop. Pierce Home Services built on. Trust. I laid my hand on the faded paint and smiled. Time to teach them that trust cannot be built on lies. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the copper pipes, making a faint sound like the heartbeat of justice coming alive in the dark, waiting for the night it would rise under the stage lights. The line, Ting Pavilion, Downtown Pavilion, blazed like an awakened old theater in midwinter, crystal lights reflecting off the glass wall so brightly the entire hall looked gilded. Along the corridor, banners showed Victor Grant in his wheelchair surrounded by flowery text. Walk for Hope, the journey of resilience, his face soft smiling, his eyes lifted like a man begging the world for faith. I arrived alone in the same simple gray suit I had worn for 20 years of work, and in my jacket pocket the silver USB felt heavy, as if it carried the sigh of the truth itself. The receptionist checked the list and bowed. Mr. Roland Pierce, honored guest. And I only nodded because the phrase had never sounded more ironic. Inside the grand hall, more than 250 guests, business owners, reporters, local officials, raised glasses of champagne as all lights focused on the stage where Victor sat in his wheelchair, wearing a black suit with a white boutonniere, his face glowing like a symbol of will and courage, while Isabel sat in the front row in an emerald dress With a forced smile, she struggled to keep steady. I sat in the third row in the dark, with my hand gripping my pocket. The MC's voice echoed like a memorized script. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor the man who inspired thousands of families, the man who overcame tragedy with faith and courage, Mr. Victor Grant. And the room erupted in applause as Victor closed his eyes, bowed, and made a gesture of gratitude. The screen behind him lit up, replaying the Help Victor Walk Again vlog, where he sat in a fake hospital room, voice trembling. I only hope to stand one day, not for myself, but for those who believe miracles are real. And soft sobs sounded from the middle rows. Tissues came out, heads bowed in prayer. But I saw no patient, only an actor playing the perfect victim. I stood up without anger, without warning, only with the quiet certainty of a man who knows exactly where the pipe is leaking. And I walked to the tech table, leaned toward the operator and said, "Same MP4 format, I only need 5 seconds." And he hesitated before noticing the Pierce Home Services badge with the words "Sponsor Partner," and nodded. The giant screen flickered, the emotional video cut to black, and a collective breath swept across the hall, like they had all witnessed the light go out. Then a new image appeared. Victor Grant, not in a wheelchair, not in a brace, wearing an unbuttoned white shirt, laughing on the dance floor at Albemarle Lounge with a glass of red wine in hand, spinning under purple lights to pounding disco music while friends cheered behind him. Every frame exposed the truth louder than any defense. Then the second clip played, Victor stepping out of a brand new Mercedes GLC, sunlight gleaming off the door, standing tall, stretching, laughing smugly as he shook hands with the salesman. No pain, no disability. The hall went silent except for the faint tremble of wine glasses, and Isabel covered her face as tears streamed through her fingers. Guests exchanged stunned looks, whispers slicing through the air like wind through a cracked door. The MC stared down, his script shaking. I stepped onto the stage, took the microphone, and said in a low, steady voice that did not tremble, "You faked paralysis to take money from people who believed in kindness. I'm not here to shame anyone. I am here to tell the truth. No applause, no words, only stage lights shining on Victor's pale, sweating face, his trembling lips, his hands slipping off the wheelchair rims so the chair barely moved an inch. I looked at the front row where Isabel sobbed, her head bowed, while at the back of the hall Nancy Lyle quietly stood and gave a single nod, the kind people give when they finally bury an illusion. I left the stage, walked past flashing cameras, and no one stopped me or dared touch me. At the door, I turned back, the hall still frozen in silence while the sound system automatically shifted to a sad ballad. That night, the video spread across social media with the headline, "Man Who Faked Disability Exposed by Father-in-Law in the Middle of Charity Gala," and the top comment read, "No one touches the light without being seen," and while thousands shared and raged, I simply sat in my workshop. At 11 that night, the yellow light shone on the old sign, "Pierce Home Services Built on Trust," and I placed my hand on it, paint dust on my fingertip, and whispered not for anyone else, but for myself, "The light is on. Now let justice spread." After the gala night, the total donations rose to $62,000, and the news spread faster than the autumn winds of Virginia. Within 3 days, the name Victor Grant flooded every morning broadcast. Businessman fakes disability to steal charity funds. Founder of Walk for Hope under investigation. The truth behind the viral video, with over 2 million views, and people talked about it everywhere, from the small Ravenna cafes to the Ashfield Farmers Market. But amid all the noise, I saw only one thing. The light was no longer in my hands. It had already been turned on in the crowd. 3 days later, vehicles from IRS Criminal Investigation and the Virginia State Attorney General's office pulled up to Victor's house. Reporters crowded at the gate, microphones pointed toward the fence. Isabel wasn't there. She had left the house the night of the gala, and according to Nancy, she carried a suitcase and cried the whole way. Victor was detained on charges of wire, fraud and charitable misrepresentation, and the transfers from the GoFundMe fund into the shell company, Grant Consulting LLC, were frozen. I sat in my workshop watching the WHSV TV broadcast, showing officers escorting him to the car, flashbulbs exploding, his face pale, hair damp with sweat. The reporter said in a steady tone, "According to preliminary investigation, more than $52,000 in donations were used for personal expenses, including the purchase of a Mercedes and entertainment spending. Federal authorities confirm that all electronic devices and financial records have been seized." The name Pierce Home Services appeared in the report as well, since my logo had been featured in his fundraising video. Several clients called, worried, and I knew that if I stayed silent, suspicion could destroy a career built over 30 years. On the fourth day, I accepted an invitation for a live interview at WHSV-TV headquarters in Harrisonburg. The reporter asked, "Mr. Pierce, when the video went viral, many noticed your company's name linked to Victor Grant's campaign. Do you have anything you'd like to say to the public?" I looked straight into the camera and answered, voice calm and clear, "I just want to keep my work as clean as the water in my pipes. I don't do charity with lies. I believe justice is like water. It always finds its way, whether slow or fast." After the broadcast, the workshop phone rang all afternoon, not with doubts, but with support. "You did the right thing, Roland. If everyone told the truth the way you did, the world would be a cleaner place." And I smiled and thanked each caller. But I knew one thing still needed to be done: justice for the people whose trust he exploited. That evening I went to Thomas Reddick's office. He was reviewing stacks of investigation documents, eyes fixed on the computer screen. "You see," he said, "the case has gone federal, but there's another path we can take: a civil claim on behalf of the donors, demanding restitution of the full $52,000. I nodded. "Do it, Thomas." "Not for me. For those who believed in something good, they deserve their trust back, even if it's returned through a check." He smiled, placing his hand on the file. "I'll prepare it, and when it's ready, the filing will read, Pierce et al. v. Victor Grant, civil restitution claim." That night, I returned home and sat on the porch, watching the workshop light cast a warm glow against the wooden wall. The wind carried the scent of pine and early winter chill. Somewhere out there, justice had begun to move, slow, deliberate, but unstoppable. And I whispered, as if speaking to all the people who had trusted me through the years, "The water's clean now. All that's left is making sure it flows the right way." That morning, fog covered all of Ravenna. The sky was lead gray, and the road to the workshop was soaked, as if someone had cried over it all night. I was wiping down my old tools when I heard a car stop outside, and the door opened with Isabel stepping out, thinner than before, wearing a light coat, dark circles under her sleepless eyes. She stood at the workshop doorway for a moment, took a deep breath, and finally said, "Dad, I'm sorry for coming without calling." And I nodded, set the wrench down, and gave a small smile. "This door is never locked for you, Isabel." She sat, gripping the hem of her jacket, her voice trembling. "I know everything's terrible now. Victor, he's been held for more than 2 weeks. They said bail is $100,000, Dad. I don't know what to do. I just want him out, at least so he can prepare for the trial. Dad, please help me one last time." And I looked at my daughter, the same girl who cried in my arms on her wedding day and once told me I was the strongest man she knew, now staring at me with pleading eyes, not realizing her blind kindness had helped bring everything down. I didn't answer immediately, instead opening a drawer and taking out a printed photo of the Mercedes GLC contract, Victor smiling broadly as he shook the salesman's hand. I slid it across the table toward her and said, "Look, this is the car he bought 10 days after receiving all the Walk for Hope money. Money donated by hundreds of strangers who believed he couldn't walk. Do you still think he deserves bail?" Isabel stared at the photo, lips pressed tight as tears spilled uncontrollably. I didn't know. He said it was a gift from the showroom. I didn't know, Dad, and I placed a hand on her shoulder, speaking slowly, calmly. I know you weren't part of this. You just loved the wrong person. But helping him now is like attaching another pipe for dirty water to flow through. You have to let the law clean this, Isabel. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed, and I didn't comfort her. I just sat quietly, listening to the wind slip through the doorframe and the metal tools clink like a ticking clock, marking her awakening. When she finally stood to leave, I said softly, "Go rest. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here." That afternoon, Nancy Lyle stopped by with a basket of warm apple pies, glanced around the workshop, and her eyes paused on the small dining table near the window. "You still keep the 3 chairs?" she asked, and I nodded. "Yes. Every Sunday I still cook dinner like before. It's just the chair on the right hasn't had anyone in it yet." And Nancy gave a sad smile. "Your daughter will understand someday, Roland. Some fathers save their children by letting them be angry. But when the tears dry, she'll see that kind of love is bigger than comfort." And I looked out the window at the sunset falling across the workshop roof, making the dust on the old Pierce Home Services built on trust sign shine like gold. I don't want to be a hero, Nancy. I just want to be a father who keeps his work clean and helps his child know what's real and what's fake, I said, and Nancy touched my shoulder gently. "You did the right thing. A person only needs to know which side they stand on," she replied. That night, after the workshop lights were off, I got a call from Thomas Reddick, his voice low and brief. "News update, Roland. Prosecutors just confirmed Victor Grant is negotiating a plea deal. He's preparing to plead guilty for a reduced sentence. Details will be released soon." And I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and in the dark, I heard the clock strike 12. 12 steady beats, like the countdown to a closing chapter. I whispered, "Finally, he's learning how to stand up. Only this time not to walk, but to admit what he did." That morning, the federal court in Richmond was covered in light fog, the sky gray and cold enough that even footsteps sounded like they echoed from far away. I arrived early, wearing an old vest and holding the file I had carried for months. Evidence, statements, and the copy of Dr. Klein's affidavit, while the courthouse hallway was packed with reporters, donors, and people who had contributed to the Walk for Hope Fund, not out of curiosity, but because they wanted to see the man who had exploited their trust bow before justice. The hearing began at 9:30, and Victor Grant was brought in wearing handcuffs and a wrinkled beige prison uniform, thinner, hollow-faced, yet with the same familiar look in his eyes, half arrogance, half avoidance. Isabel sat in the back row holding a tissue, silent, while across the aisle Thomas Reddick represented the civil plaintiffs, the defrauded donors. The judge read the 11-page indictment aloud. Defendant Victor Grant is charged with wire fraud, charitable misrepresentation, and false medical documentation. The total amount misappropriated is $62,000, and the courtroom fell silent, broken only by the clicks of pens, the blink of the recorder light, and a few sharp breaths. The judge continued, "The defendant has admitted to the offenses under a plea deal with the prosecution. This court sentences him to 5 years of imprisonment, restitution of $62,000 to the donors, and a permanent ban from engaging in any online fundraising activity," and the gavel struck, echoing through the room like the final cap on a leaking pipe. Victor bowed his head, his shoulders trembling, while Isabel covered her face and sobbed. When the judge adjourned the session, I stood and walked down the aisle without looking at anyone. But as I passed the row of seats, Victor lifted his head, his eyes lost, as though he had just realized the entire world he had built with lies, had collapsed. I stopped, looked at him briefly, and said slowly, just loud enough for those nearby to remember, "I've repaired thousands of homes. The only one I haven't fixed yet is the house of trust." And the courtroom fell utterly still, with no applause and no comment, only the scratch of a reporter's pen. One of them, a young journalist from the Daily Progress, looked up with bright eyes, and I knew she would write that line, not because it sounded dramatic, but because it was true. That afternoon, the Daily Progress released a special issue. Court sentences founder of Walk for Hope. Defendant's father-in-law says, "The only home I haven't repaired is the house of trust." With a photo of me standing outside the courthouse, holding my old hat printed on the front page, and below the headline a small line read, "Justice does not need to shout. It only needs someone brave enough to turn on the light." That evening I returned to Ashfield after the rain, and the workshop light reflected across the old wooden wall, illuminating the faded words on the sign, "Built on Trust." I ran my hand across each letter, feeling as if I had finally sealed a leak that had lasted for years, and as the wind carried the damp scent of pine, I understood that some homes can only be repaired with the truth. A year had passed since the Richmond court delivered its sentence. Spring had returned to Virginia. The Rivanna River shimmered under sunlight, and the willow trees along Willow Creek sprouted as if no storm had ever touched them. My workshop was still there, the smell of wood, paint, and the steady rhythm of a hammer each morning. But one thing was new, a polished brass plaque hanging at the door, engraved with the words, "Pierce Integrity Fund, Rebuilding Trust, one pipe at a time." I created that fund using 10% of my company's annual revenue, not for showy charity, but to help families who had been deceived by fake fundraising campaigns. Every application was verified, audited, and every dollar spent was made public. I wanted this fund to be a place where people believed that kindness could be repaired if done the right way. One early April morning, Isabel returned to the workshop, wearing a white shirt, her hair neatly tied, carrying a stack of papers. Her voice was soft but firm. "Dad, I've thought it through. I want to start over, not to run from the past, but to rewrite it. I'd like to do marketing for the fund." And when I looked at her, the light in her eyes was no longer wet with tears like the day in court, but the light of someone beginning to understand. I nodded and said, "All right, but remember, here, every word has to be as honest as welded steel." A week later, Isabel sent me her first draft for the fund's website, titled in bold, "Kindness needs repair like a leaking pipe. Don't let it drain into the wrong hands." A simple, unembellished piece, telling the stories of those who had been deceived and how they dared to trust again. When I reached the last line, "Every drop of clean water begins with a properly welded pipe," my throat tightened. Nancy Lyle came back too, carrying her apple pie basket, this time to sign up as a volunteer for the fund, joking, "I can't weld pipes, but I can weld hearts. If you need someone to listen to stories about betrayal, I'm here." That afternoon we sat on the porch as sunlight hit the brass plaque, making it glow. Isabel guided a group of student volunteers entering data, the sound of keyboards tapping like droplets falling through a cleared pipe. I looked around, the house, the workshop, the familiar faces. Everything was different, yet more peaceful than ever. I opened my old notebook and wrote on a fresh page, "Justice does not end in court. It lives in the way we treat kindness, keeping it clean, like water running through pipes that do not leak." As the sun dipped behind the hill, I closed the notebook and listened to the wind brushing against the brass plaque, whispering, "Built on trust, repaired with truth." And I knew the house of trust was finally fixed. Winter returned to Virginia. Snow dusted the workshop roof, warm yellow light spilling from inside like a lamp glowing in the frost. After nearly 2 years, Pierce Home Services had been fully repainted, the light gray coat covering the old wooden walls, fresh and clean like a new beginning, and above the door, the new brass sign gleamed. Pierce Home Services, repairing homes, restoring trust, with a smaller hand-carved line beneath it. Founded by Roland Pierce, 1987. Inside, the clock ticked steadily through the smell of pine, machine oil, and roasted coffee. I sat on the wooden chair I had used for over 30 years, watching the desk lamp reflect off an old blueprint, lines of pipes, every stroke from my younger days. Beside me, Isabel, now the communications lead for the Pierce Integrity Fund, sorted documents and donation records, no longer the panicked woman she once was, but someone steady, warm, and grown. She brought me a cup of hot coffee and said, "Dad, the fund received 32 new cases today, mostly families tricked by fake medical fundraisers. I'm writing a piece to ask local businesses to join our verification efforts." And I nodded, feeling lighter as I listened to her speak about justice with calm conviction. She sat beside me, looking at the new sign outside, then softly said, "Dad, sometimes you have to break a leaking pipe so the water can finally run the right way, right?" I smiled, sipped my coffee, and answered, "You've learned the trade, Isabel, but more importantly, you've learned that this craft isn't just about fixing pipes, it's about fixing people." We sat in silence, hearing the night wind move through the door frame, the faint clink of nails on the wall, and the workshop lights cast a warm glow over every tool, every sealed crack. Outside, snow fell thicker, blanketing the yard like a clean sheet of paper where justice, trust, and family could be rewritten from the beginning. I looked at the new sign again and murmured, "Repairing homes, restoring trust," because it was not only the company's motto, it was the philosophy of my life, that real justice does not need noise, only the steady light of a lamp burning through the night to show people the way back home. The workshop light still shone through the frosted glass, and inside, an old father and his daughter spoke in soft, steady voices while the snow fell white as a new page outside, where justice, trust, and kinship were written anew. And so, my story in Ashfield, Virginia, ended in the warm glow of that old workshop. I had lived through dark days and long nights listening to nothing but the clock and the wind, wondering if kindness was still worth protecting, and now I knew. It is, as long as we dare to repair it the way we mend a leaking pipe. I don't need applause or to be called right. I just want to see those who were once hurt find a reason to trust again. That is the greatest reward of justice I have ever understood. And if you're listening and you've ever been betrayed, trusted the wrong person, or stayed silent, thinking justice was too far away, remember this: justice never disappears. It only waits for someone patient enough to turn on the light. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this story. If you believe the truth doesn't need to shout to be heard, leave a single dot in the comments so I know there are still people who believe in the light of kindness. And don't forget to subscribe and share this story, because somewhere out there, someone might need a small light to find their trust again.